Hi, I'm Dave Waddell with the King County Art Hazards Project, and today we're fortunate enough to be at the Fremont Art Council's Powerhouse, where they're getting everything ready for the annual Fremont Solstice Parade. So it's a busy time around here, a lot of artists coming and going, and this is a place where, since there's so many volunteers coming in, there's always the danger that somebody could be bringing some of their chemicals from home to work on their art projects for the parade. And in fact, we've discovered a couple of them here. So today we're going to talk about a variety of different two-dimensional art products. So this would be things like paints and pastels, and both in spray form as well as in tube and in dry form. So with that, let's put on our gloves, because we're going to be talking about solvents, and solvents absorb through your skin. So I want to wear my chemical gloves. I got some nitrile gloves. I decided to get them in Ninja Black, just because black is pretty artistic. So let's see what we've got. Well, I found 2 cans of spray adhesives, and we have the spray mint, which is listed as a craft and display adhesive, and then we have the Super 77 multi-purpose adhesive. Now these are very popular. They come in a variety of different brand names, and even for the 3M, there's a whole bunch of different names they've got. There's a lot of other suppliers. What we find is that in order to know whether you're looking at a more toxic one or a less toxic one, you really have to read the label, which is hard if you're like me and you've got bifocals, because the words are really, really tiny on these. But the nice part is the things we're concerned about are flammable. These are the solvents that carry the adhesives to where we're applying them. And with the fire code being the way it is, the fire department wants to have anything that's flammable inside a container listed on the label. So when I look here, we see danger, extremely flammable liquid. That means we're going to find something to be interested in. Now there's a whole list of things under the contents. So it says contains non-volatile components. And I'm looking for one special word, and right at the very end I find it, which is hexane, H-E-X-A-N-E. Hexane is a really nice solvent because it evaporates really quickly and it dissolves the glue. The problem with hexane is if you either get it on your skin or you breathe in the vapors, it can cause what we call peripheral neuropathy, which means it's killing the nerve cells in the tips of your fingers and the tips of your toes. And if you get exposed to enough of this stuff, and it takes a fair amount, you can actually deaden those nerves to the point where you can't feel things anymore. And we've had people who've gotten exposed for so long that they almost become quadriplegics, where their legs don't work very well, and they can't tell if they're picking something up unless they're actually watching their hands move right towards the container. So this is one we're trying to get artists away from, especially in an aerosol form. Because the problem with the aerosol is if you pop it off and you're spraying, you're getting this plume coming out in a cone, and these tiny droplets evaporate the solvent vapor very, very quickly, which makes it great if you want to apply it to a surface, but not so great if you're breathing in the area where these things are evaporating, because these go into your lungs and right into your bloodstream. So this one contains hexane. Let's try the Super 77. Maybe this one will be free. So I check it, and the first thing I see is acetone, which is only moderately toxic solvent. And then right at the end, once again, I find hexane. This is actually even worse than the other one, because this has hexane plus acetone, and acetone and hexane have a synergistic effect that causes the hexane's neurotoxic effects to be greatly accelerated. So the worst possible combination you could see if you see the word hexane on the can is to also see the word acetone. So in this case, we would definitely be looking at trying to find a less hazardous alternative, as well as maybe trying to figure out if you can apply this in a way that doesn't involve spraying an aerosol. This kind of gets into the idea and the concepts of how to prevent toxic exposure. And there's really 4 ways people can do this. The first one, which is the least effective, is to deny that there's any problem whatsoever. So if I just stick my fingers in my ears and go na 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 and hope that I'm not going to get exposed, you're really kind of taking your chances. Unfortunately, I'm thinking, in my experience, that's probably how most artists work, because they really don't know how to figure out whether something's toxic, and if it is, how to protect themselves. The ways to protect yourself, the first way is to buy less toxic alternatives. So if you could find an aerosol spray that does not contain hexane or toluene or some other toxic solvents, then you're reducing the risk of you getting a toxic exposure because you're working with a less toxic alternative. The second level, if you have to use a material that has some toxic characteristics, is to have really good ventilation set up. And what we want is local exhaust ventilation. The way local exhaust ventilation works is you would have a source of clean air behind you that's blowing that clean air at you. So a fan with an open window that's pointed at you, that's bringing clean air past you, past the toxic stuff that you're working with, and then a fan or a duct that's pulling those toxic vapors or dust away from you. So clean air, you, toxic stuff, and something moving that clean air past you, past the toxic stuff, and out the window or out the door. The problem is that, similar to the powerhouse here, it wasn't originally designed to be a location that was going to need to have that kind of ventilation. Just like people's home studios typically are not designed that way. And so the problem we've got is that you're now trying to sort of figure out a way to adapt the building to something it's not designed to do. So opening doors and opening windows is a good start, especially if you can open them on both sides, so if there's a breeze blowing, you're getting some cross-dilution ventilation. Maybe getting something set up in a window that's got a board with a hole in it and a fan, like a bathroom fan, with some ductwork to help move that air from close to where you're working out. Working outside is another alternative. And here in the Fremont powerhouse, some of the more toxic materials that they're working with, which aren't many, they tend to do the work outside. So things like welding or something like that, which would give off a lot of fumes. Let's do that outside where there's a lot of dilution and a lot less risk of people being exposed. When people are looking for less toxic solvents, sometimes they'll look for some of these citrus cleaners, figuring these come from orange peel, so they must be safer than some of the other materials. And in some ways they are a little less toxic. The problem is that when you extract the orange oils out of the orange peels in an industrial process, you're really refining something down to the point where it's got much stronger characteristics than you would anticipate. And orange oils, which is D-limonene is the chemical component that's in there, can cause allergic reactions in some people. It's a combustible solvent, so there's still that flammability risk that you're facing. And this is a good example where we have two different forms of this essentially identical product. One that's in a liquid form that you would paint on, and one in an aerosol form. It's almost always safer to use a liquid form that you're painting as opposed to an aerosol, just because there's much less evaporation and therefore you're breathing in much less of the vapors. So when in doubt, in the same product, if you can paint it on with a brush, go with the paint on liquid form rather than going with the aerosol. And just because something's citrus doesn't mean that it's necessarily safe. You still need to be careful when you're working with these combustible, potentially sensitizing materials. I always like looking at the labels on these containers. This is CitraClean, which sounds quite nice. And down below it tells you some of the things it's not. So it's not flammable. It has a pleasant deodorizing action, which I'm not quite sure what that means. It's 100% biodegradable. So is strychnine, which is rat poison. And it has no harsh solvents. However, there are many people who are very sensitive to the main constituent, D-limonene, the citrus in citrus solvent, and actually can have an allergic reaction with skin rashes, maybe some irritation of the eyes and the throat and the lungs. So just because it's natural doesn't mean it's necessarily non-toxic when it comes to solvents.